Hello. Hi, Sophia. Oh my gosh, Sophia, we are gonna make a grant happen.
Hey Roberta, hi. Sorry, I realized just a moment ago that my speaker was off. Hi.
No worries. Um, I actually didn't think we would be able to do this, but I am, I'm hopeful. I,
hmm
I didn't actually realize the R21 date was 10 days later. So I was like, a whole week? That may be possible. Hi, Christian. All
Oh,
right. Are you still in clinic? Okay, Christian, if you're saying something, I can't hear you. Okay, I still can't hear you. Uh-oh, we might have lost Christian. I know Katie said she had to schedule an MBSS, so I'm actually going to meet with her at 1 o'clock. So,
okay. Wait, can you hear me now?
oh yeah, I can hear you. Yep. Are you still in clinic?
Okay, good. Yes. Sorry, I
Okay.
just had to just. No, I'm done.
Oh, you're done. Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Katie is
Yeah.
going to be available. She thinks at 1 o'clock. And so, um, I think what Shin needed to know, and maybe Sophia, you can help us with some of this, because I had a question. Now, when we were talking about an R21, it does change how we approach what we are going to suggest. And
hmm
I think it is worthwhile still to do the R21 given the timeline. The one thing is that we have to be pretty, well, one, we have to get preliminary data. I forgot I was on NICU next week, so that's actually great. I'm going to be with the baby, so hopefully we can get a baby. Um, Hopefully we can get approval so that we could image patients that just are going to swallow, because I think that was one of the other issues, is that we were trying to get a patient who needs a lung MRI so we can kind of piggyback onto that. But if we can get our swallow imaging time approved, then we don't have to worry about that. We can just image children who have swallowing issues and get the preliminary data that way. I'm not going to suggest anything related to imaging the lung, just because that will probably be a little bit too much for an R21, as far as I can tell. Prabhu's going to put in the R21 looking at lung imaging for the BPD babies. And
hmm
I think one of the questions that I don't think it's an issue, but he's going to go through the R21 mechanism. That's the precursor to the catalyze program. And he already contacted the um, like the program officer or the person who's kind of in charge, and it would be through the imaging center. And they said, yeah, you don't necessarily have to have any imaging people on it other than who we already have as MRI scientists, and Prabhu
hmm
could be the PI for that one. And they were interested in lung. I will go ahead and then, even though it's last minute, I will email them and see if they're interested in swallow. If we don't hear back, I think it's worthwhile still to try to put this together because it still is a good exercise. Um, but I think the one thing I wasn't 100% sure about is if the free max was set up so that we could do respiratory monitoring and acquire that data at the same time for babies.
Yeah, I'm also not sure about that. So on the scanner, remember we have the three different coils, those flexible coils.
Mhm.
In the largest one, we call it the contour large, but it's that soft coil that's flexible. In that large one, it has something called a pilotone sensor. It can detect respiratory signal, but it was developed and tested on adults. I don't know if it will work well enough for babies. But in
Hmm.
terms of respiratory monitoring that the scanner, that comes with the scanner already, that's where it is. It's in the contour L in the large coil.
Mm. But we could still do the respiratory bands, right?
I don't think we have one for that scanner,
Oh, so we don't have.
because The Freemax doesn't have what we called a PMU, which is called peripheral measurement unit, so it doesn't have a ECG.
Oh, it doesn't.
It
Oh,
does, the scanner natively doesn't, but I know that we have the in vivo tower that's right next to the scanner. I think that has some capabilities. So, for
oh,
example, when we do cardiac scans, we use the in vivo to get the ECG signal. The scanner natively doesn't have the belt.
I got you. Oh, that's interesting. Do you know if the in vivo is just for monitoring or can data be recorded?
I'm not sure. One of the Johns might know. They're a lot more familiar with the in vivo system.
Mm,
Yeah,
that-
this is Shin may reach out to you also because we are looking into this issue.
oh,
The B star that Shin is trying uh, is not gating the respiratory motions as accurately as we want. So we wanted a sort of a second system that can
mhm,
read the respiratory signals,
Hmm.
and that's when I realized Freemax actually doesn't have anything.
mhm.
So yeah, Papu, I don't know if you caught my my answer to Roberta.
Yeah,
The Freemax doesn't have the belt, but it has a wireless respiratory motion detector. But it was made and it was tested on adults, so I don't know how well it will work on little kids.
where will I find that? This one?
So, yeah, so it's embedded in the coil itself. It's in only in the contour large. So on the Freemax, we have three flexible coils. There's a small, there's a medium, and there's a large. The
Yeah,
large one has you won't be able to see it. It's
yeah.
all under the cover, but it has basically a little a signal generator, and the scanner will detect the signal, and from those two pairs, it can figure out the signal modulation and extract a respiratory waveform from it.
And it is, I mean, we are using the small one, I think,
I
on,
see.
but indulge my imagination for a minute, okay?
Mm-hmm.
Imagine the baby is lying on the large
Mm-hmm.
and the small is on top of the baby.
Yeah.
And so we acquire our images using the small one. Will the large potentially, I know you said the accuracy you can't say for sure. Potentially, can the respiratory movements be ascertained in that way?
I think it's possible. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Wait, can
Okay.
We
you,
should try it.
and you can use two coils at the same time?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Because I just, I know that when we tried and I can't remember though, Sophia, when you did my imaging,
Mm-hmm.
if we used the bigger coil or not. Um,
Um,
because
I think,
I'm wondering if the
mm,
coil is like, say we use the big coil and it's wrapped around the baby,
yeah.
but the idea would be, could you still acquire the upper airway real time and try to get it around the lung? Or is it just easier, like you were saying, is do two different things, use one for the respiratory and then use one for the airway imaging?
We can try it, and it's a pretty easy test, because on the scanner interface we can select which coil element to use for image acquisition. Um, so we can see what the image quality look like. Uh,
Hmm.
so if we can have a small kid lie on the scanner for us, we can answer both questions. The first question is if we can pick up the respiratory waveform for a baby using the wireless respiratory detector. That's question number one. And number two would be how the image quality would look if we sandwich using the two coils together.
And
Probably.
for Roberta, you were thinking you're having the baby sideline or
Mhm,
45 degrees, and you have the small coil around the neck, and you are feeding the baby and getting the airway uh, and pharyngeal images through there. But is that plane the same plane for lung acquisition?
We would not be doing lung acquisition.
Okay, so what is,
Yeah.
then why do you want to know the respiratory?
I think one of the things that I wanted to do was look at pulse oximetry and then also look at respiratory rate
Got
at the
it.
same time, or paradoxical breathing. Because I think, I don't think we can suggest too much, but I
Yeah.
think we can, try to better understand how the feeding and the swallowing is impacting respiration and
Yeah,
putting
yeah.
those two together. Because I think feeding by itself is still very important, and trying to identify the children that are at risk for aspiration. But I think tying it to lung is still going to be important, but maybe that's my bias. Maybe it doesn't matter, but it is something. I mean, I was putting in, I think that original, just a thing to John, that we would do BioPack. Now we haven't set up BioPack. Prabhu, do you think you need something like BioPack to be able to look at respiration?
Can you explain biopack?
BioPack is so it's an analog system that
Mhm.
acquires physiologic data based on individual units of the system. So you buy all these different things. I don't know if maybe you haven't seen it then. We use it for a bunch of different things. And there's MRI compatible units. We have one set up at DISC. We have them set up at MR4.
So I have used biopack for respiratory inductance
Mhm,
plethysmography, but
mhm,
that's in the NICU.
mhm. It's
So
the same thing.
there is an MRI compatible unit for that? Oh, that'd be perfect.
Yes. Now, I don't know if they're still using it actually at MR4. I know the last time, so Matt Borzage was using it and Andrew Cheng was using it. I
Yeah,
don't know if they're still using it. It's definitely not something we want to pull back and forth. It'd be too messy to move
yeah,
that
yeah.
back and forth. We have two biopack setups that we're not using, where we could use the most expensive part, which is the biopack setup. So that we were using for sickle cell research, but we don't have any of those active studies like going
Okay.
on right now. So we would just need to get the MRI compatible, like respiratory bands or
Thanks.
pulse ox. And that would actually be relatively inexpensive.
Yeah, yeah. That will be fantastic.
Yeah, I think maybe we should just put that in there, with, maybe some consumables, like just put in those bands. I actually have an old quote, so to put us in the general, um, you know, ballpark for getting some additional equipment. And I'm pretty sure, because it's under, technically Tom Coates owns those units, but we're not using them. And I
Mhm.
don't want to make it seem like we don't have the capability, or we don't know what we're doing and we're going to buy a biopack unit and set it up. I'd like it to seem more like we already know how to use biopack. We just need to get some extra bands,
Yeah.
that type of thing. So if you need that added, maybe that's what we need to suggest. So in vivo, we're uncertain if that could acquire data, or probably
In
Yeah,
not.
I
vivo,
don't know about the in vivo.
what
Um,
does in vivo mean? Sorry.
In vivo is another physiological monitoring system.
Mhm.
So the Freemax, we have it we have the in vivo system at both the Freemax as well as the Sola.
Mhm.
And this is the 0.5 and the 1.5.
Yeah.
And I
Um,
think MR5 has it too.
mm,
Oh,
It's that
this
unit.
is that standalone monitor kind of
Yeah,
thing
I
yes.
think
that they
that's
can.
what
Oh, yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Yes. So I was explaining to Roberta that the Freemax doesn't have a typical physiological monitoring unit native to the scanner. And so the way that we've been doing cardiac imaging on the Freemax, namely to get the ECG signal, is through the in vivo. So the in vivo system is attached to the patient, and then the in vivo system, we have a cable going from that tower plugging it into the scanner, and then the scanner reads it as a external signal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so two questions. One is hopefully you're working on an internal system. For-
Yes, we are. Yes. Yes.
Okay, that's number
Yes.
one.
That will
Second,
come, and CHLA will get it probably in 2026, together with the gradient upgrade.
oh, okay. So gradient
Mhm.
upgrade is not this year, huh?
No.
Oh, okay. Okay, so the second question was, so even though you are connecting a cable to Freemax or Solar, uh, and it is able to gate it for sequencing, but
Yes.
are you able to actually, when you download the
Mhm.
DICOMs or whatever, do you get that recording also? Of what
Yeah, good question. So, uh, the the external signal that the scanner sees is not going to be as meaningful as the waveform that we would see on the in vivo system. So, I'll take ECG as example. It
Yeah,
simply sees it as on, off, kind of like a binary, like a square waveform.
yeah.
It wouldn't show you the shape of the QRS.
That's enough, actually. On off is all we are looking for, actually.
Yeah. So that information is embedded in the data, but in the raw data, not in the DICOM. So the images that you see maybe from PACS, that
Mhm.
wouldn't have the raw data, but it's something uh, that we could retrieve from the scanner. It's usually a much larger data set.
Mhm.
And for MRI, this means that it has individual channels. It's the case space instead of the image space data, but the information is there if we want to extract it.
Yeah, so I've done like 6 babies on Freemax.
Hmm.
You were there for one of them. And we have connected the in vivo system to the baby. I don't know if
Hmm.
actually connected it to the MRI. So if it had been connected, Shin can presumably access that.
Yeah, but in a kind of a limited way. Like I mentioned, you're only getting you would select which channel um it, for the input of that external. So for
Mhm.
example, let's say if we select ECG as the external,
Yeah,
then the scanner will only see the square waveform representing the ECG.
yeah.
Let's say if you choose the respiratory, then you will only see the square waveform representing the respiratory. So you
So
wouldn't
at the
see
time
like
you
a
are
comprehensive multi-channel as you would on the native in vivo system.
so at the time of connecting it to the Freemax, we don't need to select anything. This selection that you're talking about is still after the data acquisition.
The selection is done on the in vivo side. The
On
scanner
the
simply sees on, off, on, off. Yeah,
of one signal.
you have one signal, correct.
Oh, okay. This we need to be mindful of. With the next patient, I'll try.
Hmm.
Okay.
And but I think in vivo is made by Philips. Yeah, so I'm not super well versed in the capability of the equipment. I would wonder if in vivo has its own recording system. That way you get all of the multiple channels, it's higher data fidelity. You don't downgrade your data, you know, um,
But then
yeah,
it
because
has
of
to be
this.
integrated with the MRI acquisitions.
Right.
Do
Would
you?
you
Do
would you
you?
need it to be synchronized?
It does, right?
Well, I think
Hmm.
you can synchronize it. Usually what we do is like a lot of things is you just like tap the monitors and sometimes you can figure out a way to like synchronize it that way. I
You mean with the time?
Yeah, so you kind of have a time point, like you're continuing to monitor. Can I ask this as a quickie question? And just also want to note that Krishna's here. So if we
Yes.
have any
I
like
know.
Krishna specific questions, that would be great.
Yes, I'm here. Any specific questions for me? I'm happy to jump in too.
Yeah, I think one of the other things, Krishna, that we can ask, because we were just talking about the BioPack unit. Do you know if you've started to use it to monitor respirations?
No, we have not started to use it. There was a request for additional items to be purchased to make it more streamlined. And then we just are trying to get some clarification on those parts that we were supposed to buy. Um, so a different bellows was needed in order to connect with some synchronization mechanism that Sebastian was interested in. I don't
Mhm,
actually fully aware of all the details, but
mhm.
it has not been ordered or tested yet.
Got it. Okay. Because I think that's what we're trying to figure out over here is like, just what's the best way to make this work in terms of like monitoring and synchronizing respiratory monitoring. The in vivo also does pulse ox, right? But so is there a pulse ox that's set up for the Freemax, or that's not possible either?
If there is, it would be through the in vivo.
Oh, it's all
Yeah,
in. Okay.
yeah. Native to the Freemax scanner, it doesn't have very much physiological monitoring
Mm,
capabilities. The only one will be that wireless respiratory um, feature that's in the Contour large coil.
gotcha. Okay. Prabhu, do you have any questions for Krishna?
Uh, I have a few lung questions, but I won't take his time up for during this time. For the swallowing, Krishna, you've seen this in adults so many times. Are there any respiratory movements that you can see in the neck? I'm thinking aloud, actually. Or Robert, are you?
So we haven't done a ton of swallowing studies in adults. We've done a lot of speech production studies and some studies of obstructive sleep apnea. And for the speech studies, we're looking a little bit more superior and anterior to look at the vocal tract articulators. So we haven't been focusing that on the backside. So I'd say the closest thing of relevance is the sleep apnea work, where we are looking at the pharyngeal airway.
Mm.
And for a current project, we're looking at some lower airway in patients with tracheomalacia. But again, we haven't done a ton of subjects, say less than 10. But your question was about was it about image quality or imaging performance?
I'm thinking
What was your question about?
both in terms of I mean the aim, Roberta's aim is to see if we can get respiratory movements at the same time as swallowing movements. And in this area, the only thing that respiratory wise that moves is the vocal cords, I think. Right? Is there anything else? I don't think anything else move. And you can't see the vocal cords, right?
We can't see the vocal cords that well because they're so thin. I mean, the vocal folds. You
Yeah.
can see movements of the larger structures, but the vibration or the movement of super thin structures is hard to see. You can see that. You're more likely to see that with other modalities.
Yeah.
And I guess I didn't even think about asking this, but maybe I should just to make sure. Like, if you can have two different coils set up, is it possible to image the airway and the lung at the same time?
It is there's usually a penalty in performance because the MRI scanner has kind of a sweet spot, just like a tennis racket. And so you want the area, when an area that you're imaging is outside the sweet spot, the quality can be substantially lower because everything's calibrated for one small little zone. So, I think it's easier to do speech and brain than it is to do speech, to do vocal tract and lungs because the distance is much greater. And the sweet spot, the best sweet spot is around a 30-centimeter sphere.
30?
Middle of the scan.
Did you say 30?
3-0. Yeah, I mean, there's different levels of calibration that the scanner does. So, like brain imaging, which usually fits in a 24-centimeter sphere, usually has the best kind of like calibration. Slightly worse if you make the sphere bigger and bigger and bigger. So if you want to simultaneously image parts of the body that are very far apart, it's not going to be anywhere close to the quality of looking at one part in isolation.
I just wonder because, these are babies.
Yeah.
Less than-
Babies, they probably will fit.
That's interesting.
And Roberta, just to give you another number. So Krishna is exactly right. Like 30 centimeter is kind of the sweet spot. The scanner will allow you to image up to 50. But you will start to see some distortions towards that end.
At least on Philips, I have scanned babies' lungs using the head coil.
Okay.
At least on Philips.
I keep forgetting we're talking about babies. So everything fits.
I don't think they'll fit in the head coil, though. How do you do a head coil? I mean, a baby's like bigger than the head coil.
But there are head coils that don't have an end cap.
Yeah.
There are birdcage head coils where it's open on the top.
Oh, so we would need a different one. Than
Uh,
what we have, because ours has a little head, like it does.
yeah, the head and neck array for the Freemax does have a top gap.
Got it. So then is there anything that we could even buy or it'd have to be custom made for the Free Max if we wanted to have like a tube that we could put a baby in?
I mean, you could use the large and just roll it, wrap it around, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's
It's
what we
very
were planning.
similar.
Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe that's what we should wind up doing. I know that Shin wanted to use the small coil around the neck. Um, do you see that there would be a huge difference if we wound up using the big coil around the whole baby? So it's covering both, like, from the nose down to the maybe diaphragm. Would we lose a lot by using the bigger one?
I missed the very beginning of this call. Was this about primarily a swallowing study?
So we want to have like two different aims. So one aim is to characterize using the low field normal swallowing in infants. The second aim would be to look at a patient population where there's concern for dysphagia or aspiration and be able to see if we can detect aspiration in children who are getting the standard testing, which is a modified barium swallow study using fluoroscopy. And then the third part, which for an RO1, we wanted to take a look at patients who aspirate and look at the lung disease, but I think that's too much for an R21. And so one thing I just wanted to be able to do was assess their respiratory status while they're swallowing, because that's something I think that's very doable, but I wasn't sure the best way to do that. But if we
Okay.
could scan potentially a patient swallowing and breathing, I didn't even think that was going to be possible.
I mean, there's the stuff that you put in the grant, and then there's the stuff that you do anyway, right? That sounds like one of the things that you just do anyway, and might not put in the grant because it's a little bit more like, experimental, right?
Mm-hmm.
The other stuff you said for the EAMS sound very palatable, like they'd be very palatable to the study sections that I would anticipate.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I asked about the goals is that posture is going to make a difference on what coils you select. So are you planning to do this supine, or are you going to try to do the elevated postures? Because some coil geometries will work. The coils need to be placed so that they're sensitive to the magnetization perpendicular to the axis of the bore. And so if
Mm-hmm.
we're going to do some of the elevated positions, figuring out the coil in the elevated position is going to be a trickier issue.
It actually would be set up like the swallow study, which is a side lying type of position. I can show you a picture if
Okay.
that would be helpful.
Okay.
And
Yes.
Krishna, I'll describe to you in words. So the baby will be kind of perpendicular to the direction of the Z
Mhm.
direction.
I don't know if you
Oh,
can see them.
um,
Can you see the
oh,
baby?
I can see the picture. Oh, wow. That's how you do it?
Yeah. That's what I was actually surprised. They said for bigger kids, so this wouldn't be possible for like an older child, but for infants, we could do it side lying.
So, what, why wouldn't they be, if they're going to be flat, why wouldn't they be parallel to the magnetic field?
It's mostly being just trying to get
Aspiration
them,
rate.
just
As,
trying to position them and being able to visualize them because,
Oh, so for access.
yeah, exactly.
access and I think if you ask the question, why can't they be supine? That's you presumably are doing this because you're worried about aspiration. So that's the
Yeah.
highest risk aspiration position.
Mhm.
Side lying is often tried in kids who have aspiration. So it's safer, considered to be safer.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay. So
it's
for some reason
I,
I thought you were using the chair. Sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead,
oh, yeah,
proceed.
so I was just gonna second that point. Yeah, so like sideline position, I think it's favorable, especially like left sideline for like the esophagus to be more open, and for kids who have various types of dysphagia, it's often a favorable position for infants. So I think it's something that would be done anyway from a dysphagia point of view, and so that's another factor that Katie in particular brought up for us.
I mean, in that configuration, the wrapped coil, be it large or medium, sounds reasonable to me. The only reason I think it might be slightly favorable to tilt the baby a little bit so that their torso is lined up with the B0 field is that it'll make sure that the more of the coils, and this is a kind of comment for Sophia, more of the coil elements are sensitive to the transverse magnetization. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Because right
Mm-hmm.
now, if it's wrapped around their back, a couple of the elements are not sensitive to transverse. They're so sensitive to the elements that are around the baby's back are not in the best direction for signal to noise ratio.
Mm-hmm.
So like if the baby's still on the table flat, but if it's just kind of rotated by 45 degrees,
Mm-hmm.
that might give you better signal noise.
I see. I see.
But then the issue is whether the person in the room can appropriately monitor and interact with the baby.
Mm-hmm.
That was actually going to be one of my questions is there any type of camera that could be used within the coil so we can see the baby
Yeah,
better?
yeah. You can use optical cameras. You can there's all sorts of optical systems that can work. You
Is
just don't
that
want to have a lot of you just don't want to have electronics in there.
because when we're thinking about the baby being inside, if they were kind of turned so that they're more in alignment with the board, would there
Yeah.
be a system where the person who's feeding the baby could actually look at a video while they're in there?
I mean, you could do that, or you can just use mirrors. That's what most people do.
Oh,
They
what
just
was
use
that?
mirrors. Most people just use mirrors.
Oh, mirrors.
Like
Oh,
mirrors work.
oh, I
Just,
didn't even think about that. A mirror.
yeah. Mirrors are not magnetic, not metallic. Like a little plastic, kid's mirror. You could just have a little mirror and then still hand the baby whatever you need to do. And actually, even a lot of the homemade camera systems have the camera further outside, but just have a mirror, and it gets the job done.
Holy smoke. Because I think a lot of but I'm going to talk to Katie next, is to identify what type of visual cues people are using so that we can also try to put that information together. But just for feeding the baby, if we can put the baby in different positions and see which one is better, because I think the other big question is they're just so tiny. Like, how good is this going to look when they're little and maybe potentially moving around a lot? This is like the best information that I thought. I didn't even know I was going to get a mirror out of this.
Well, also if you go buy a mirror, you never know what materials are in the mirror. So if you go to Target, just bring a bar magnet with you. Just
Oh,
to,
got you.
you
Okay,
know,
because
before you buy it. But I think in most cases, a little cheap mirror should work.
okay, excellent. Um, I guess the other question that maybe I'm not sure about, um, is I think Christian, some of the things that you were thinking about, or maybe do you have specific questions? Because my biggest question right now is like, how many planes could we image the baby in to be able to identify aspiration versus residual, like liquid content around the pharynx or the larynx, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, I think the most important, like even on the preliminary one we did with you, I mean that the kind of sagittal view, like the
Mhm.
parasagittal, is probably the most critical, and that like gives us the equivalent of what the MBSS would show, like that lateral projection view. Um, but if we're able to get also like an axial level around the level of the larynx, that would show kind of residue that's in like the piriform sinus or something around that level. That would also be helpful and interesting and add something that you don't really get with a modified barium swallow.
And then I guess and maybe this is me just thinking from my brain, not an MRI brain, but maybe an axial view that's like thicker, maybe we'll be able to see more of what might be kind of, pooling around
Uh-huh.
the larynx. How thick would a slice need to be, do you think? Would it be like a centimeter? Can you do 2 centimeters? Because I think what we're trying to do is get as much signal as possible. Maybe we don't have to have great resolution.
Yeah,
What were
I
you
mean,
asking?
yeah, I don't know. From an imaging point of view, I wouldn't be the one to know. But if you're asking like how big anatomically, I
Yeah.
think a centimeter would be more than enough in an infant. Even
Hmm.
less than that would probably be okay to see the piriforms. But a centimeter should be fine in an infant if that's feasible.
Krishna, were you going to say something?
From an imaging point of view, yeah, from an imaging point of view, thinner slices are always harder to achieve. Thicker slices are easier to achieve in the imaging method, and they tend to produce slightly blurrier images because remember in MRI, when you make a thick slice, you're getting the summit projection through the slice. So if it's not perfectly lined up with the anatomy, that can cause a little bit of loss of apparent resolution.
Hmm. I guess that's something else that would,
Does that make
yeah.
sense?
This may be, so Christian, I actually have not thought about this, but if we wanted to try to look at residual, would would it be possible for me to just swallow and kind of try to get it to the back of my throat? I actually don't know how I would necessarily try to mimic that.
I mean, the best way to look at residual, maybe in like a test subject like that, would be to have some thicker consistency that just leaves more residue, as long as it's still detectable. But that, that might be for someone like if you were going to do it and you don't have
Uh-huh.
dysphagia, we'd be more likely to see residue if we had something with a little bit of thickness to it.
Like yogurt or something?
But then now we're changing, yeah, because that will leave some residue. But I just
Hmm.
don't know. But now we're changing, like, because that's one of our variables too. Is like, what are we, what's the consistency that we're feeding?
Hmm.
And I know we were looking at formula versus breast milk and all these things, um, but it just in terms of answering the question of like the projection or whatever, and how can you see residue? Maybe we could test with just a thicker consistency with a adult volunteer.
Okay. All right. What else do you think we should be thinking about? Because these are things that either we try to
Oh yeah.
test or.
What about the question about the temporal resolution too? Because we were looking at that.
Oh,
Um,
because babies will just be faster. Mm.
or just know about like the number of frames per second, or we were looking at this,
Mhm.
like how, and I think we did that test with when you were swallowing, Roberta.
Mhm.
And what were we deciding as far as the optimizing that? We may have to look at that again with babies too.
Oh, okay, that's a good point. I forgot I was supposed to ask Katie that question. Sophia, do you know what the frame rate can be? Like the highest?
Yeah. Let me pull up the notes. So there's a trade-off between the frame rate and the image quality. So if we try to achieve a higher frame rate by in MR, something called acceleration, then we also take a hit in the image quality that we get. So Roberta, based on the experiment that you and Shin ran together, the best one that looked to our eyes was the five frames per second. And the scanner is able to achieve 10 frames per second, but the image start to look kind of grainy and a little bit low signal. So for adults, if 5 frames per second is what we liked, I probably wouldn't push it, expect the scanner to be able to do better for a baby, which would have even, less signal, less proton in their bodies.
Sophia, was that Cartesian Beat Interactive?
Yes,
Okay. And it was 5 frames per second with like frame by frame reconstruction.
yes,
So there's always a possibility that offline we might be able to reconstruct at a higher rate, but
yeah,
online that's the frame rate.
yep.
Can you explain that, Krishna? I was just thinking about that.
Yeah. So the way that I was just checking with Sophia which sequence was tested in that prior scan. So the way that the product sequences do it is they acquire all the data from one image, and then they reconstruct it, put it on the screen, require all data for another image, put it up on the screen. However, you can, after the fact, reconstruct intermediate frames by taking the second half of the data from the first acquisition and the first half of the data from the second, put it in one. It's statistically dependent from the other, but it
You're
also
breaking up,
provides
Krishna.
a level of, oh, sorry. I might be going through a Wi-Fi connection weak
Okay,
spot.
we can hear you again.
Sophia, would you mind explaining view sharing?
Yeah, sure.
Okay,
Uh,
the idea is that you can share data. Okay, yeah.
So I think about, on the scanner, basically, you get frame one, frame two. And in MR reconstruction, there's something called view sharing. That means we take the second half of frame one and the first half of the frame two, combine them to get frame 1.5. So your frame rate artificially increase by using this technique. But you won't see it directly on the scanner. This will be a additional step that takes place after scan is completed.
And presumably, if you did, for example, 30 frames per second acquisition, and you did 5 frames, or rather, I'm sorry, 10 frames per second acquisition, and you did a 5 frame per second acquisition, 2 separate acquisitions, and you
Mhm.
tried to do this with the 5 frame, would it look identical to the 10 frames?
It wouldn't look identical because the way that the scanner achieved the 5 frames per second versus the 10 frames per second is by um, um, undersampling the K-space. And it does so in a clever way where the center of the K-space, where the majority of the data is sampled more than the edge of the K-space. So it's not um, a linear yeah, I wonder if linear is the right word. It's not uh, a linear reduction. So the view sharing it's done in a slightly different way. So the result, the appearance of would look a little different.
Hmm,
It wouldn't be identical.
got it, got it. It won't make things up, or
It won't exactly. Yes.
it won't necessarily miss periods of times.
Yes. So, maybe another piece of information that would be helpful is, let's say if the 10 frames per second already looks grainy, it doesn't look great, we don't like it. After applying view sharing, it will not improve the image quality. Um, yeah.
Got it.
Mhm.
I mean, if we whenever we get to do a baby, we could try 5 frames per second,
Mhm.
then try to do this post processing and see how it goes, I suppose.
Yes, exactly. That's very sensible. Yeah.
I think I might have missed something. So it would be better to use the 5 frames per second instead of doing 10 frames and then trying to do the additional reconstruction afterwards.
Yeah, so yes, exactly. Because the view sharing doesn't magically improve your image quality,
Mhm.
so we should keep the acquisition um, uh, w using a protocol that give us satisfactory image quality.
Because I think one question was like if we did an axial view and we're trying to catch a baby aspirating, that you'd have to catch it right at the moment. Like right at that very moment where it passed through the plane, unless that plane was really big, even if it was a centimeter. I don't know. Actually, I don't know.
Well, I think the sagittal view is more forgiving with time because anything that gets below a certain level that's in the airway will be aspiration. But then you have a little bit more forgiveness in time window, just because you don't have to see it at the moment it crosses. You could see it if it's a centimeter or two below the cords already in the airway, then you caught it still.
And maybe I'm not thinking about this correctly. Can it be, can you have multiple slices? Because I worry that the baby might move a little bit, or as they're breathing, their trachea moves, and it's so tiny that there's still a lot of motion, even if the baby is very still.
Mhm.
Like
I
I,
guess the other question, maybe we were talking about the thickness in the axial, but also maybe variable is the thickness of even a sagittal view. If it's very thin, then you're right, the airway could move out of plane or something. But maybe if we're able to get decent resolution with a little bit of a thicker slice, that might be more forgiving for some movement. I don't know.
Mhm.
It's a good question.
Christian, how big is a baby's trachea? Like, I actually don't know. I probably should know
I
that.
mean, like in terms of the length
Diameter? Oh yeah.
or diameter, baby, something like 5. I mean, depends on the exact age, but maybe about 5 millimeters diameter.
Hmm.
Oh, so a whole centimeter actually could cover.
Oh, a centimeter in width is bigger. Yeah, for sure. Centimeter, I mean, adult trachea is like 1.5 centimeter or so.
It's not so
So
much bigger.
yeah, it grows a lot. Yeah, babies, preemies can even be 4 millimeters or so. Yeah, it can be small.
That sounds actually way more doable. You can get the whole trachea in the plane. I was thinking we were trying to make this slice go straight through, and the little bit of aspirated fluid needs to go right through this plane that we pick. But if it's going to cover the whole trachea, that might be doable. This may be a more doable project than I realized. Hmm.
And Roberta, to answer your question about multiple slices, in research, in MRI research, there's something called a simultaneous multi-slice. So it uses a clever a slice excitation technique so that you can acquire multiple slices. But it, I wouldn't, try to include it in this R21 application, simply just because this is not a MRI technique development grant that we're trying to achieve. And also, even with the simultaneous multi-slice technique, you need to have like a little bit of a gap between those slices. So if we're talking about a really tiny anatomy where we don't want to miss anything, let's say if we have a 10 centimeter um, slice with a 5 centimeter gap between the slices, we're looking out of the neck already. Yeah. And then the other one is you can acquire the slices sequentially. You won't have the gap issue, but you take a hit in your temporal resolution, which also probably wouldn't make sense for the study either.
What is that multi-slice thing called again? Multi-slice?
It's called simultaneous multi-slice. The shorthand is SMS.
Okay.
Mhm.
I was just looking up while you were talking about frames per second. Christian, correct me if I'm wrong. The international standards for fluoroscopy, the gold standard for adults, is 30 frames per second. I just found a paper published last year that tried to reduce it to 15 frames per second and found equal quality. This is all fluoroscopy, radiation. So what they normally do, they did it using the same system, except this time they did it at 15 frames per second and identified the same results. But I think in the discussion, they were talking about the give and take, in that if you increase the frames per second in fluoroscopy, you're increasing radiation, but you will identify many aspiration events that are not identified at smaller frames per second. That leads to a conceptual question, which is we sometimes find aspiration events, which as clinicians, we're like, that's so tiny. Is that really relevant or not? And the clinically significant aspiration events may be detectable at lower frames per second, for example, in MRI. So that can be a study on its own, Roberta, is what should be the threshold frames per second that can identify clinically meaningful aspiration events. So I think this has just opened up so many things in my
Yeah,
brain.
there's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
Recording in progress.
And the other thing about the 5 frames per second, this is just uh, what's already available to us straight from the scanner. You could use clever techniques, for example, spiral acquisition, which is what Krishna's lab is specialized in, that will give you much higher frames per second. Um, so something to think about. Maybe not for this grant application, but um, there's there's more capability that the MRI scanner can do beyond that what's available to us right at this particular moment.
So can the spiral be used in Freemax, or is it only at USC scanner?
It can be used on the Freemax. The easiest way for us to program it is in the Heart Vista system, which I believe is still pending. It's intended to be set up on that scanner. Once that's set up, we'll be able to try spirals very easily and try some of our accelerated online reconstructions very easily.
When is that coming? Is that also 2026?
It's supposed to be coming this year. I believe there was
Yeah.
approval for it. I don't actually know the status. I'd have to check with John, or does anyone else here know?
It's in the nitty-gritty of like contract negotiations, but some of the prerequisite hardware has been delivered. So like I think it's going to be in the next few weeks to hopefully not months.
Krishna, can I ask just a general question? I remember there was a time when you were doing like the upper airway imaging and
Yeah.
the coil was getting really hot. Is that something that we need to worry about as we're thinking about imaging the babies?
So the sequences that we often use on our ramp down era use very aggressive use of the MRI gradients. And if they're using the wrong frequencies, they can cause temperature heating of the gradient coils themselves. And Sophia taught us how to identify those frequencies so that we can avoid them, and also taught us how to monitor the temperature. That has a couple of different effects. There's the warming, and then there's also it changes the center frequency of the scanner, which can cause some artifacts to show up during the scan, like later in the scan. So I think we have to study that on a case-by-case basis. Whenever we design a new protocol, we have to study it on the scanner, see if it's heating things up. And Shin has a plan in place for how to test to avoid these things before using them in people.
Okay, perfect.
That can be tested in a phantom. It does not need a human in the scanner to predict it.
Okay. What other things should we talk about? I'm hoping Katie's going to be on in a few minutes.
My phone, I lost my connection when you were talking about view sharing. Did the question get answered? Because I can answer it better. If I can answer it more, if there's any more questions. Not better. I know Sophia knocked it out.
I was going to say, Sophia, I think it answered it pretty well.
Okay.
We don't know what you guys are talking about, so we just accept it.
Sophia did a home run for me.
Okay.
All right. And then I know we've talked about this a little bit, but maybe I could just ask Sophia and Krishna, since you're both here, is we've been trying smaller volumes, like to just detect the water as we swallow it as a, surrogate of trying to aspirate it. But then we're going through the esophagus, so there's a lot of soft tissue around, the bolus that we're swallowing. If we are using like just water and I'm swallowing like smaller and smaller amounts, how do you think that would differ when we're trying to detect it in the trachea? Does that make sense? Like I can see 5 mLs really easily through an axial plane. We see it pass through. If we can see it in the esophagus, you think we'll be able to see it in the trachea, or is that going to be really different because it's going to be floating in air?
What do you mean floating in air?
Like if you aspirate, it's
Mhm.
going to go through the trachea. So it's just
Yeah.
going to be.
I guess the question is the contrast going to be
But it's not, it's going to be just at the gravity lower part of the trachea, right? It's still going to be all together. It's not like,
I actually don't know if it always goes. I don't know. I don't know.
like from the normal cohesion of the cohesion and adhesion, won't it still stay together? So you'll still have voxels of
So it'll
bright
still be
fluid.
like you could see it like just at the back of the trachea, just sliding down potentially.
That was my assumption, but maybe that's wrong. I mean, there could be an issue if the same volume of fluid is kind of becoming a mist, right? Because then your proton
Mm.
density per voxel is way lower. But if it's all together, then it should look the same. The only difference might be that, okay, it's really close to the wall of the trachea. And so is there enough contrast between this 5 mLs of water and the wall of the trachea?
Yeah, to actually see that it's different than, because it's going to be moving too at the same time.
I think
I'm
was
curious,
thinking,
Christian. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
So sorry, Eamon. Is water white or black?
It's
on
bright. It's
It
bright.
is bright.
It's
Okay.
bright, yeah. And if you drink a fluid that has a shorter T1, like pineapple juice or something like that, it'll be even brighter.
Got
So
it.
you can generate more striking contrast if you pick your liquid carefully.
Yeah, Shin actually found that the water was the best. We tried all the different, we did the sorbitol, we did the pineapple juice.
Oh,
Water
nice.
seemed to work really well.
Great.
So I was
It might be because the T1s are shorter.
Mm.
That gives it an advantage. Yeah.
Has
Sorry.
there been any work looking at maximizing the contrast between tissue and a fluid as opposed to trying to maximize signal from a fluid that you know of, Krishna?
It's, I don't think people have spent that much time in investing in it because it's you have to choose whether you want bright or dark contrast. If you want bright water contrast, then you just generally want the T1 to be as slow as possible, and that'll also give you the biggest contrast between the liquid and the vessel, the tracheal wall or muscle in the case of cardiac imaging. So
Okay, yeah.
I just thought of something. Maybe we could create like a phantom to try to see the minimal amount. Like say we assume that you had, like, maybe I don't have to swallow it. Maybe we just have some kind of thing that is similar to human tissue and then just drop small amounts. And we can like say 100 microliters, 200, and see what that, kind of cutoff is. I just don't know what would be the phantom for tissue.
Well, we can have a pup, right?
What was it?
A cat or a puppy.
A puppy?
They feed on bottle. I'm not joking, or rather half joking.
Or, maybe you could even take your tongue, because that is like the tissue we're looking at, and just put a little water on your tongue. Like just because we were doing 5 mLs, 1 ml, but when we were talking to Katie, and we could actually get some of the images from the MBSSs so we could see, because she actually sees it in fluoroscopy, even though, I mean, she's seeing everything through the plane. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know how this is going to look.
I think it doesn't need to be super complicated. A little plastic tube will be fine.
yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
That's it? Oh, okay. All right.
I agree with Sophia. And if you really want something like a reference tissue, I mean, you can just buy a piece of meat from the butcher.
Mm.
Buy a piece of muscle, right? I mean, there are differences between tongue and skeletal muscle, but you can buy a
Okay. Got it.
Yeah.
All right. What else can we ask Krishna and Sophia?
I had a question for you. I think right after the low field meeting that we had that you hosted, Roberta, I got an email. I think it was from Christian about the idea of doing kind of this feeding study in babies that get that thing snipped.
Oh, the frenulum.
Yeah, was that you, Christian?
I think it was. He mentioned he
Oh,
emailed you.
yeah. That was a really interesting idea. I apologize for not replying earlier. I was wondering if anything kind of happened with that idea.
That is sick. I had not thought about it. Actually, that can have a lot, a lot of public health issues thing because it's such a some people call it benign problem or whatever, and the intervention is somewhat simple.
Mm.
People, I don't know, Christian may know this, we typically don't test them. It's just looking at it, it's baby growing well, etc., and then you do something. I don't think anybody does swallow studies on them. And then you suddenly have this evaluated tool that is risk-free.
Yeah.
And then you start testing them. and you have a somewhat objective measure of should it be snipped or not.
Mhm.
So and millions of kids are affected over a period of time. I'm not saying at the same time. But,
You're talking about the tongue tie, right? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I think yeah, exactly. I think it's in many cases the decision is kind of very subjective. But the impact of the you know, doing the tongue tie could potentially also be measured before and after with this kind of test, and to see if we're looking at, you know, how much does the tongue tie actually impair the movement during swallowing, or, you know, I think there's not much data on that because people won't really do a modified barium swallow because of the fluoro risks and things unless there's actual aspiration. But in many cases, the impact of the tongue tie is more, you know, it's a little bit more of a softer call. It's just like they're taking longer to feed, or, you know, something where maybe they wouldn't necessarily need the MBSS. But if the study has like you know, no other inherent risks, then it could be very valuable. Just actually in terms of learning, like, you know, for a different type of tongue tie, how much mobility is improved, what is it, how does it affect the swallow timing, like all the other things we would be looking at. I think this could be really helpful, but I think, you know, that's something I was, you know, thinking could be a nice focused idea. But I think, you know, the more we talked about it, I think that the aims that Roberta was talking about are important to achieve first. Like, I think we first need to establish that this is a valuable tool that's comparable to MBSS, that we can assess these various aspects of the swallow, and then we can apply that to some of these clinical situations more effectively, I think.
Yeah. Cool.
I have a non-swallow question for Christian and Sophia. I mean, Eamon's probably thought about this already, but is there an idea or a thought for the swoop, that ultra low field, that we would be able to do lung MRI with it?
You mean the hyperfine scanner?
Yeah.
It came up in a meeting earlier today. The issue with the swoop is twofold. One, it physically would be too small to fit anyone but a baby, like a really small baby. It's really designed for brain imaging. And then the second problem is the reconstructions are not open. So you're limited to what Hyperfine provides you in terms of reconstruction. And they're doing a lot of sort of AI-based reconstructions to deal with their very low signal to noise ratio, which we already struggle with in the lungs. So I wouldn't, you know, I don't want to ever come out and say it's impossible, but I don't think that it is going to happen anytime soon.
Prabhu, do you remember what the field strength is for that little small stationary MRI unit that Cincinnati has?
1.5.
It is 1.5?
That's
Okay.
used to be GE orthopedic scanner, orthopedic coil rather, into
Okay.
which they put the babies in.
Got it.
Now,
All right.
I think I don't know, Krishna, if you're interested in this, in that you have hyperfine, presumably babies, the whole babies can go through that. And we do lung imaging on Freemax, and then we can do them on hyperfine as well, assuming we have access to all this, right? Would that allow you to develop the reconstruction sequence algorithms?
I mean, it depends on how open Hyperfine is. I mean, I don't have any interaction with them. I was just looking through LinkedIn to see if I know anybody on their development team, because it'd be worth finding out. It'd be worth finding out if lungs on their radar, because might incentivize them to open up a little bit. I don't know. I don't see anybody that I know. I thought Joe Schlumper used to work there. I'm not finding him. I know a few people that interned there. I can ask around. Who's the main kind of person that works on that system for you guys? And would they have any contacts with the company?
Yeah, so we have a ER physician, Pradeep. What's his last name, Roberta?
I think Eamon was going to say.
Or Amen, yeah.
Sorry, what was the question?
Basically, does anyone who's the main point of contact with Hyperfine within CHLA?
I don't, so Pradeep Chowdhury and Natasha Lepore are the PIs of the R21 that's funding the work that they're doing. And then I don't know exactly how we ended up getting a system. I know it's on loan, but I've never dealt with anyone on the like foundation or Hyperfine side. So we'd have to ask Natasha or Pradeep.
I mean, it's a small world. I think we could easily find contacts in that company, but I don't know offhand what their appetite is for this.
Interesting.
It's
Thank
not,
you.
yeah.
Just an FYI, Katie's walking to her office and then she's got to log on.
Right. I got to go. I think I'm late for another meeting.
Okay.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Yeah, and I do know someone who was at Hyperfine. I think she still is, so I could definitely reach out to her.
Is that Melissa Haskell?
No, Melanie Trauber.
Sure.
She used to work at Philips and gave the pulse programming courses when I was in grad school, so I saw her at a number of Philips events.
Yeah. I mean, Harry Hu and Brian Welch used to also work there. Yo Schlumper is there. He's actually in charge and responsible for their AI recon. So we have some connections, but it depends on whether they're even open. I've heard that they're less open ever since they went public. And they switched to kind of trying to monetize their system instead of spending more in R&D. That would impact things.
Yeah, and it looks like Melanie's not there anymore, actually. So
Sorry about that. I got distracted for a moment. Okay. Krishna, do you have any recommendations for an R21 on dysphagia?
You mean study section, things like that, or?
I think we had thought that there was maybe some interest in the imaging one. Let me see real fast. I'm not very good at the names of these things.
I would probably go with CTIS, clinical translational imaging, if you go with the imaging study section.
Okay. Do you think, oh, hang on, CTI.
I'll put it in the chat. I'll
thank you.
I'll put the study section in the chat.
Prabhu's going to try to do the catalyze version of the R21.
Okay.
Do you know how easy or hard it is to get funding through catalyze?
No idea.
Okay. Okie dokie, Smokey.
That says NIDDK. Is that an NIDDK mechanism or is it a general mechanism?
General. It actually has NHLBI as part of it.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
I guess the other question I had, I was assuming, like from previous conversations, that your lab has so many projects that you don't necessarily seeing someone coming over to CHLA to do projects, or what are you thinking at the moment from collaborating on lung MRI versus the tracheobronchomalacia projects?
There's lots of people in the lab that want to come to do work on various projects. We are understaffed for the grants that we currently have. So basically people are having to prioritize a little bit the funded projects. I think there's definitely a lot of interest in getting something going related to lung, but it seems like that's also more in best position for Eamon and Shin to kind of lead those efforts. So that's why we've been kind of, doing what we can on our system, but also just trying to sit back a little bit and see how things go, right? But we have we do have a lot of students and we're trying to grow the lab, but we're just understaffed for our projects right now. Was that what you're asking?
Yeah, no, that's perfect, because
Yeah.
I think that was one of the questions. I think Shin is open to working on swallowing, but it wasn't necessarily her highest priority. So if there
Yeah.
was someone else that was interested in, that kind of technology or um, some development around that in your lab, it sounds like she might be open to like giving it away.
Yeah.
So Katie's actually on. Katie, I think
Hey,
you might
everyone.
be Krishna. Krishna's over at
Hi.
UC.
Nice to meet you.
Hi, nice to meet you all. So sorry I'm late.
Not at all. I mean, we're just happy that you're able to make this one. Katie, I think we had some very specific swallowing questions for you.
Great.
Are you ready?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay. So one thing that I was trying to figure out is I think it would be ideal if we could show the MRI scientists video of fluoroscopy of someone aspirating.
Okay.
Do you think you can recall anyone that might have, a very obvious, aspiration event?
Yeah, I have in presentations that I have, I can dig one up that I have permission to show.
Yeah,
Um
wonderful.
and send that. Yeah.
And are you thinking that those aspiration events are like what type of volume are you thinking you see?
It depends. So some kids have frank aspiration, but if we're looking at the younger ones, it tends to be very small volume. um, Almost micro aspiration where you have to just like slow down the frame, watch the travel of the bolus, and confirm that it's below the level of the vocal folds. Those ones are harder to see.
No. Okay. And you're thinking like half an ml or even like smaller amount?
Smaller, I mean, yeah, yeah, a very small volume. But what I was hoping we would be able to see potentially with MRI is not a lot, but some of the time it will coat the posterior wall depending on where the aspiration occurs. So you don't have to necessarily have the moment of aspiration. You might be able to be sensitive to seeing something in the airway, anything in the airway below the level of the vocal folds that wasn't there before is suggestive of aspiration.
So it accumulates over the course of the test?
No,
This.
just sometimes it sticks. So, and that's the thing. So for MBSS, we use the Veribar products, and they'll tend to like coat the trachea or remain below the level of the vocal folds for neck swallows, which actually serves as a visual barrier for us because we're like, well, we don't know if that's a new aspiration because there's still something there, right? But then for fees, we use real, like milk or something like that. And that too will tend to be able to see as the vocal folds open in between swallows. Sometimes we can appreciate something still within view from above on the fees in the airway, but that's not always the case. So sometimes this may not be very sensitive to an actual micro aspiration. But I think the bigger picture is looking at if we're looking at the lung of an infant along with their swallow physiology and looking at comparing the two and what that means for infant lung development would be highly interesting. Do I think that MRI is going to become the most cost-effective, most sensitive way to detect aspiration? Likely not, considering, aspiration, especially for younger kids, happen during the swallow. But do I think there's clinical utility that can extend beyond what we can do with MBSS? Absolutely. Like, I think that we could use this as a way of testing normals because you're not able to do that with ionized radiation. We can't just put every normal baby into a fluoro suite. And we don't have enough information about what is normal. Is it normal to aspirate some of the time? Do kids with totally normal tone and no diagnostic underpinning sometime aspirate? And we're throwing that word around with these kids who have other comorbidities where maybe some level of aspiration is okay, whereas sometimes not.
Yeah, when I try to Google this, Google thought 20 to 70% of normal people will aspirate. And I was like, I wonder where they got that information.
Well, there's definite data to support, like as we get older, we aspirate. We have more penetrations, we have more aspirations just as we age. That is known. So, but there's nothing out there for kids that really helps to guide us. And I think that sometimes we are overprotective of our kids and their lungs, but other times it's certainly justified. Because Dr. Cato, you've had 6-year-olds come back to clinic who we know have been aspirating their whole life, and they may not have lung problems, but then another person with the exact same situation has terrible lungs. So it puts us in a difficult situation.
Yeah, do you I think the other thing that we were trying to figure out, just from a number standpoint, um, would be how many people do you think actually, like I was trying to look back at the schedule and I see like the MBSS schedule. Like if
Mhm.
you were recruiting patients, how many patients would you even have one a week that might aspirate? Like if we were trying to look at the babies.
I
Uh,
just had one today.
oh, you did? Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, if we look at just a week, we're only sending patients that we are thinking they're going to potentially aspirate. So, especially for our inpatient, it's not uncommon to have at least one a week.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, because I'm just trying to, from a power analysis too, is like see the numbers that we actually have.
And how much time it would take.
Yeah,
And or we might not have one for 2 weeks, but then we might have three in the next week. It would just depend.
yeah.
Sometimes I do 3 swell studies and they all three aspirate, that happens.
I mean, I think it'd be also interesting. Do you think that, like, say you are finding people who aspirate, do you also wonder, well, they seem to be for sure having like clues or cues that they aspirate, or you're just not catching it on fluoroscopy?
Well, it depends on who we're talking about. If we're talking about infants, they're the silent aspirators and they're
Mhm.
not showing us anything.
Uh-huh.
Anything. Like today, the monitor was absolutely fine. Baby had no change in behavior, no change in engagement in feeding, no change at all that I would have detected except for I saw it on the monitor.
Do you do pulse ox monitoring when you're doing it or respiratory?
If they're on, yeah, if they're on monitor, and that one was on monitor today. So NICU always comes on monitor.
Mhm.
But then it just depends. If the physician has an order for monitoring, then they always come with monitor.
Ah, got you. How often do you see, like a respiratory change or a pulse ox change in the
We'll
patient?
see they'll get to Kipnick on the monitor and sometimes tachycardia, but then also these monitors, like the NICU, they come with their real monitor, but the portable monitors, a lot of the times the nurses say they're not very sensitive. So we don't see as many changes, but sometimes I would say it's mostly the extreme preemies that actually show with physiologic changes that something else is happening, and it's not common.
Christian, I saw that you're going to leave soon.
Mhm.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Roberta, any remaining MR questions that I can help answer?
Not at the moment, unless
Okay.
Katie, do you have questions about what MR could do?
So I was just wondering if we wanted to test human milk because I just got back
Mhm.
today and I haven't had time to catch up on everything. Are
I
we
think
looking to?
Shin would like to do it next week.
Okay,
Yeah, I think we
okay.
for sure.
I think that would be good that we look at both just to see.
All right, Sophia, I think you're free to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
All right, because I was going to try to figure out, oh, you know what I could do? Let me show you. Because what Shin was also wondering about is what are the measurements that we should be trying to describe that we will be collecting during the MRI so that we could,
Mhm.
you know, identify things that you're seeing in the MBSS, where we can go
Right.
back and like say, okay, this patient had and that X. How
Mm-hmm.
would we measure that in MRI? So
And
residual.
that depends on like how well the visibility is. So we kind of need a pilot test, because I don't know what I'm going to be able to look at or how well I'll be able to visualize it. I know I'll want to know volume. I'll be counting swallows. I'll be looking for airway invasion. I'll be looking at timing of swallow. Is that the kind of parameters you're talking about?
And I think, so I'll say a few things that we were talking about before you were on. So, like, one thing I was wondering is the volume that we can detect. And they were saying, just put it in a tube. So, and you should be able to tell if you can actually see it in the plane. So, if it's like 100 microliters, if it's 50 microliters, let's see if we can actually see that. Just the volume itself.
Uh-huh.
So, that's something we could definitely do. Um, and then just do that with, say, formula and breast milk, and then be able to say, yes, we are able to visualize this much, at least, as a static volume.
Through a NG tube or through,
Oh, just in a little tube. But
just like no patient, just a tube.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Just I don't even know what you call it. Like we call them Effendorf tubes or something.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Just to make sure we have visualization.
Exactly. Like we know we can pick it up if it's a small volume, because I think
Mhm.
because if it's a dot, can we actually see that?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think that was one thing. We talked about the frame rate. I know it's very different than fluoroscopy. You were saying it's like 60 or
Yeah. I think it's either 60 or now you're,
oh, sorry, I threw out a number.
yeah, no, I know, because if you just asked me open-ended, I would have got it. 1 second, I could check. It's frames per second. I think it's 30, but you said 60.
I know nothing about what I'm talking about.
Well, I should know this. I'm just confused right now. Yeah, I think it's frames per second for MBSS is 30, correct? Yeah, it's 30, but then you said 60 and I'm like, wait, yeah,
All right, because it sounds like we won't be able to do more than 5. 5
right.
we are like cut off for sure. The other question I had was related to positioning of the baby. Krishna feels that we will still get the best signal if the baby is in line with the bore. And so, from a feeding standpoint, I wanted to say something that they suggested if we wanted to be able to still visualize the child. There's
Uh-huh.
2 different things. One is they said just put some mirrors in there and you should be able to see the baby. I don't know if you'd be able to feed the baby.
But they'd have to be like you mean in line with the bore like they're supine, like this?
That they're, how like they're transverse when we were doing it in
Uh-huh.
mock up, we would just put them 45 so their body would
Yes.
still be a little bit elevated.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Just like how a normal person would go through the MRI scanner,
Okay.
but on their side, like you
But
have.
on their side. Okay. And then we'd have a mirror so I can gauge how they're reacting.
Yeah, would that
Yeah.
be? It's something we can try with just the little, baby doll. And then
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think that should be okay.
I'll go and buy some mirrors. I was
Okay.
tasked to buy mirrors, so I would.
Okay.
So we can give it a try. They also said, and I don't know if this is useful, but when you're doing an MBSS, do you think that there's anything from a visual standpoint that would be helpful for us to monitor? Because there are MRI compatible cameras and
Hmm.
can record. I don't know if that's helpful or not.
I mean, I mean, I do think that it's helpful, especially if I'm just looking in a mirror, but it wouldn't be essential.
Mhm.
Any additional information, especially since it's a study, would be helpful, especially in review.
Do
Is
they?
it even possible to have one of us like get in position and do like drinking with a bottle so we can see what that looks like?
They totally do that.
Because I want to know, like bottles have certain flow rates, right? So if we definitely can't detect it with an adult drinking from the bottle with
Fair
normal
enough.
suction, I'm not going to do it with breast milk, but like then,
Fair enough. Yeah, that was my other question. You mentioned there's some products. I imagine they're the barium products that you add.
uh-huh.
Does that change the viscosity?
No, it's still ITSE 0. So they have barium products for each viscosity. So they have a ITSE 2, ITSE 3 that's already pre-made and already comes at that viscosity.
Got it. Okay. All right. And then I almost feel like, so when we originally determined the number of patients, it was like just grabbing a number out of the air. So
Uh-huh.
we said like 20.
Uh-huh.
And that number is definitely won't cost very much. So we could definitely increase it, but I wasn't going to increase it past the number of people who actually are available for an
Okay.
So usually what I wind up doing is, and maybe I could just verify with you that I'm looking at the right thing. I see a schedule that says MBSS. Let me see if I can find it.
Are you looking at the outpatient schedule?
I'm looking at the outpatient schedule. Do you think that that's, I can show you what I'm looking at to see.
Yeah, we would want to be looking at the inpatient, right?
Oh, I didn't know. Is there an, hang
Well,
on.
because what is our target age?
I'm still thinking it's gonna be like infant size. So it could be, a preemie who's 12 months old, but so it's probably gonna be,
Yeah, so we'd want to stick with inpatient because outpatient, one, they're not aspirating as much, so it might take a very long. When I was referencing once a week, that's more inpatient.
oh,
It's the babies that are sick that don't have a plan for PO quite yet for home. Those are the ones who are the ones that we tend to see aspirate. And so if you go under, I don't know if you have view